Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Start Marketing Podcast. This is Joe Sanders with you. Thanks for joining us again. We really appreciate it. This is a podcast that is set to help business owners navigate through that strange world that we like to call digital marketing. We like to provide practical tips and strategies for social media that can help you to be very successful when going out and marketing your business on those platforms. We use a 5-step process throughout every podcast. And like I do at the beginning of every single one, I'm going to break that down for you really quick so that you know where we are and have a good starting point. Our 5-step process is: number 1, find the right audience. Number 2, create the right content. Number 3, promote your business as a brand. Number 4, use ample resources. And number 5, analyze the results. We have broken down each one of those steps in previous episodes, and you can hear all about them, as well as other interesting topics like the one we're going to talk about today, as we have a very special guest, Pat Helmers, today to help us understand how we can use podcasts to help promote our business. Pat, how are you? Thanks for being here.
Hey, Joe, thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. What an honor to be here.
Well, the honor's mine because those of you guys may not know this, but I had no idea how to do any of this. I guess it was about a year ago. And actually, somebody introduced me to Pat, and he actually had me on his podcast. That was the first one I had ever done. And since then, he helped us actually start this podcast. So we're very appreciative of Pat and his wonderful magical skills when it comes to promoting a podcast. So Pat, let's start right at the beginning. If somebody's out there, and let's say they're just a small business owner or a mid-sized business owner, and they're thinking like, I've heard about podcasts. Is this something that I can do? Is this something that will really help my business? Is this something, Pat, that small and mid-sized business owners can do? And how will this help impact their business in a positive way?
Well, there's a lot of questions packed into that.
That's all right.
Let me see if we can.
You're a special.
See if we can tease these out here.
You can handle it. I know you can handle it.
I can indeed. Well, first off, don't you think probably everybody's listening to this podcast to a certain degree sees the value in podcasting?
Hopefully.
Because they're putting some energy personally into it right now. But I don't know if business people especially, fully realize what makes podcasting unique is that you can do 2 things at once. And it's an opportunity for people can learn something, people can be entertained with a podcast, and they can be driving a car and they could go for a walk and all of that, which is what make podcasts unique from, say, doing a YouTube channel or maybe doing a blog post or doing a social media post, or writing an article that's on Medium or on LinkedIn. All those things require people to really focus. Like anything in marketing, a podcast is a way for you to stand out from everybody else. It's an opportunity for you to brand yourself. And it's a very, very intimate way. I think a lot of business people don't exactly see, although they see the value of podcasts for themselves, they don't see how it's possible for them to actually grow their business. But they can with their podcast, and there's like 5 different ways of doing that.
Fantastic. Now, Pat, if those of you that don't know who Pat is, I'm going to have him talk about himself for a minute here, because Pat really is a guru when it comes to podcasts, helping business owners create podcasts that really help drive their brand and drive their business. So Pat, why don't you take a minute, tell a little bit about your story, a little bit about what you've been doing, your podcast and things like that, and so people can get a good idea about where all this incredible knowledge is coming from on the other side of the microphone.
No, I actually started a podcast, Joe, I think it was 7 years ago. I remember really, really clearly, I was going on a sales call for this company, this tech startup company that I worked on. I was the VP of sales, and I was in Missouri, and I was going up and down those hills, and I was looking for a podcast that was all about selling. And I couldn't find one that I really liked. And if you remember back in those days, you had to download it using iTunes onto an iPod. Those are very antiquated times. But I remember thinking, you know what? We need a good podcast on selling. People like me, whose background's not sales. My background was software engineering, but there's lots of people who got a love and a passion and a craft and an art about something, but it's not about selling. So that's why I started a podcast called Sales Babble, selling secrets for non-sellers. And then the whole idea was just to cut away all the babble about selling, that it's all about being pushy and aggressive and assertive, that it's really about helping people. And we started it in about 7 years ago, March 2014. And this is being recorded in April. So it's just a little bit over 7 years ago. And so I've been podcasting ever since then, interviewing people from all over the world. And what I found is in a lot of that podcasting and those interviews, it actually created my brand. People looked up to me because I had the podcast, and it helped me get an awful lot of growth in doing business consulting and sales coaching and stuff like that. Cool. So I think it was just a couple of years ago, people have been asking me how to start a podcast for quite some time, and I kept pushing them off. They said, well, you know how to start a podcast. Would you like to help me start a podcast? And I'm like, I don't know. And I finally kind of gave up about a year and a half ago and started helping people start a podcast, and found I really enjoyed it. It's really
you helped, really, because you helped us too. And I'm coming from the world of marketing and my background, my team, just to brag on Pat a little bit, I have a team that's very tech savvy, and we do, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Google and web design and all that kind of stuff. And when it came to doing a podcast, I think we said, we could do this. We should do this. It's going to be a great tool for us to have in our marketing, toolbox and everything. But, having somebody like Pat really help us and walk with us and kind of go through the ins and outs and all that kind of stuff, really, I think, saved us a lot of time and frustration, because if you go to Google and you type in how to start a podcast, you're going to find like 10,000 different articles on that. But, having somebody walk through this with you and really go to task and work with your team on, this is what you should do, this is what you should do, and here's all the technical aspects of that, I think was incredibly helpful. So thanks for that, Pat. So let's get into it a little bit. Give me a success story. Give me an example of somebody that you worked with who was looking to start a podcast, maybe for some business that maybe you wouldn't think should have a podcast, and kind of tell me, what that did for them. So what can people expect? How can this go well for them?
Yeah, I got a lot of stories actually.
Okay.
But let me bring up one though. I got some ladies who have a professional caregiving business, and they're the ones that get power attorney for people who don't have family. And because they've got illness or they're becoming elderly or something like that, they need someone to kind of look out for them and make sure they don't get swindled, and that the hospitals are taking care of them properly and making sure all their meds all lined up. They do stuff like that. And they started a podcast about a year and a half ago. And I think they're 20 episodes into it, doing a couple every month. Yeah. And it has created a lot of opportunity for them. They are mostly just in Northern Illinois, all the work they've done. Mm-hmm. But because a podcast goes all around the world, they've had people connect, reaching out to them all over the place. They've actually been able to bring some of those people onto the podcast and create business alliances that they never had before. So it was just very, very exciting. One day they called me up and said, Pat, I can't believe what's happened. These people just reached out to us, and they got this business that they're starting up, and they want us to be an advocate for them, and that's going to bring leads to us. And it was like, oh, that's awesome. Cool. So that's a pretty fun. That's been a pretty fun podcast to working on, and I've learned stuff working with them about an industry I didn't know anything about, which has also been kind of creative.
That's really cool. And, I'll tell you, I shared this story with you after I was on your podcast. Now, your podcast, Sales Battle, was pretty popular. It's a pretty famous, well-respected, well-listened to podcast, and obviously it should be. So I was on Pat's show, I don't know, I guess it was a year ago or something like that. And I remember and again, I told you guys, that was the first time I had ever done anything like this, podcasting wise. And about a week later, maybe it was like 4 or 5 days later, I got a call from a gal in Boston. And we're primarily do a lot of our business, as you don't know, here in the Chicagoland area. But we got a call from a gal in Boston who goes, I was searching for podcasts about marketing. And I found this episode on Sales Babble. and I listened to you. And she goes, and Joe, you explained marketing in a way that I'd never heard anybody explain before. And she hired me. She hired our company right on the spot. We're still doing business with this client like a year ago, because she was searching for something and found Pat's podcast, which I was on. And subsequently we got a client out of it. So Pat, so let's explain to people, like, how does that work from a technical perspective? If I make a podcast and I know that there's like all these different channels to be on, there's Apple, there's Spotify, and there's Google Podcasts and all these different things. When you go in, when you have a podcast and you're in that world, I mean, how does that affect like your SEO and when people are trying to find you? Like, how does all that work?
Well, I think it all depends on the industry and what your podcast is going to be about. But I think it's really critical, and I know you believe this because you were just mentioned this at the top of the show, was that people need to really understand who exactly is their ideal client.
Yeah.
And they need to make sure that their listener base, that their ideal listener is their ideal client. So if you have a podcast that's about something that you really like about and you really care about, but it doesn't align 100% on your business, this won't work.
Yeah. So
let's say I'm only selling to, let's say I have a piece of software that I'm selling to chiropractors or something, right? Mm-hmm. Then it better be a podcast that chiropractors would listen to.
Right.
It would be something where they would find value about something, which may not be your business necessarily. Yeah. By the way, right. This is all about good selling techniques that you need to understand the industry that your customers are in as well as they do.
Yeah.
And you need to put content in there that's as good as what they have. So when you have somebody on and you talk about that content, you need to do all the SEO stuff. You brought up SEO, like you need to make sure the title of the show is something somebody would search for. How to do this in chiropractic, that kind of thing. 5 things in chiropractic people need to know. Classic kind of content marketing kind of stuff. And you need to make sure that there's show notes in there that speak to all of that. And that it's linked to stuff that is in that same context, so Google can do its SEO work. So
interesting.
So that's one way. But there's other things companies can do to help generate revenue. Or can we talk about that? Are you
absolutely
good with
no?
that?
Let's
right.
Do it. Yeah.
Right. This isn't just like something to. These podcasts actually can make you money. Because if you're very careful, like if you bring on your existing clients in and ask them about what was it like before you met me, what was it like working with me, what would have been the results of working with me, that's like a little testimonial. Mm-hmm. And you talk for 15 minutes, people hear that, they go, oh, that sounds like me. I need to hire those guys. The other thing too is at the end of those kinds of conversations, it's an opportunity for you to go to your client and say, oh, by the way, do you have any referrals for me? Is there anybody that's been looking for something like this? So this creates an opportunity for you to have a conversation with them that's not awkward whatsoever about getting a testimonial.
Yeah, got it. Interesting. So in some regards, like podcasting is kind of just like the new blogging. Is that kind of
podcast the new blogging? I think Seth Godin said that. Yeah,
did he? Well, I said it.
Yeah,
then he did. So podcasting is the new blogging. So is this so if somebody's looking for, basically what you're saying is, because I mean this is what we do with it too, is and I guess I could just say it, is that podcasting is just a great way to create great content. I know on our podcast we like to talk about subjects related to our specific business in terms of things that we do, things that we're involved with. I wrote a book. I'd like to talk about my book, Stop Posting Marketing and things like that. But we also bring on guests, and we're bringing on people like Pat. We had the last couple episodes that we had some pretty interesting guests on there. And I think, and just like you said, Pat, like these are people, you're a person like the other guests that we've had in here that are really helpful if you are a business owner and you're a small to mid-sized business and you're looking to figure out how to do digital marketing. I mean, this is hopefully adding value to those people. And in return, that should then add value to our business, because like the woman in Boston who heard us, they will hear us and they will say, oh, that's me. That sounds like something I need, something I want. and then they'll reach out, and that is the thing. Now, in terms of monetizing as well, is there a way to actually, because I've seen this, and I know that your podcast is pretty prominent though, is there a way to make money? Do people ever charge to download podcasts, or are they always free?
They're almost always free. Very few people make money doing ads. That's not in the business space, especially in the B2B space. That's not, you can never make money because your podcast is going to be so niched that you'll just never get a significant number of downloads. And that's what advertisers are commonly looking for.
Right.
But there's a different way of making money on the podcast, is that if it's exactly the right set of people and it's hard to get to those people may pay you because your audience is their audience. So I saw a guy at a podcast conference who only had 100 listeners, but they were exactly the right listeners. It was a very niche place of accounting, and there was only like 100 of these in the whole United States, and everybody listened to his podcast. So there was one company that sold software to those people, and they sponsored him for a lot of money every month to be mentioned on that podcast. So it all kind of depends on that. But I think more importantly is the relationships and the networking that you build from podcasting. In some regards, it doesn't even matter if you have a lot of listeners on that podcast. Right. Picture the possibility that you could meet anybody that you want in your industry, and think of what the doors that could open if you knew those right people. But it's hard to get to know them. They won't take your call. They won't listen to you. You send them an email, it doesn't go anywhere. But if you reached out to them and left them a voicemail and said, I know you're an expert in this industry. I have a huge amount of respect for you. I would love to have you on my podcast. Practically everybody says yes.
Yeah, right on.
Practically everybody. So think about people that you've been wanting to talk to. Maybe they're prospective clients, or maybe they're people that know a lot of other people that could introduce you to them. Think about who those people are. I bet anybody could come up with 6, 7, 8 people that they'd love to know. They've always wanted to meet, but they can't. Invite them to the podcast as an honored guest. They will be happy to meet you.
That's great. I love that. Hopefully, well, that's why I brought you on, Pat, because I wanted to meet you, and I wanted you to be on the show.
Well, of course, we already knew each other.
Still, hey,
oh, by the way, I got your book right here.
Oh yeah, you have my book.
People can't see this on the video because we don't.
No, they can't. I was going to say,
start marketing. Yeah. How successful business market themselves in social media while others just post.
Yeah. Very good. Yep. Well, I appreciate it. Hey, so Pat, let's do this. I know that the next question I'm going to ask you is the loaded question. We could probably talk about it for a long time, but give me an overview here. Give me a practical. Let's get a little practical for a minute here. We've talked almost this whole podcast about the why to start a podcast, but I want to switch the conversation to how. So can you just give an overview, or how to get started, or what you need to do? How, if somebody's sitting and saying, you know what, I love what Pat is saying, I love what Joe is saying, I want to start a podcast, I have no idea how to do it. How does one go about starting a podcast?
Let's walk through the steps. Obviously, you have to figure out what kind of format of a podcast you want. Is it you just talking about a subject like you maybe would in a blog, or are you going to interview somebody? Well, there's software out there that you can use to interview. We're on a Zoom call right now, but I'd like to use Zencaster. It's a free piece of software. And you come up with a set of questions, and you interview them, and you get an audio file. And then if there's free audio editing software out there, and where it can take the sound and make it kind of okay. There's free music out there, or as a one-time fee, a royalty-free music, and you can put music on the front if you want. And when you get that file, what you do is you have to load it up to a media server. And there's various companies that do that. And when you load that up to a media server, it gives you a link, a URL link, where you can listen to it. And that allows you could post that onto a blog post, which we call show notes, and you can talk about that. these media servers also have something called an RSS feed, which is a big HTML page, and you actually submit that feed to a series of podcatchers, they call them. But there's the apps that are on your phone that you can listen to podcasts, and there's a ton of them, right? There's Apple's, there's Google's, there's Stitcher, there's Spotify. You can actually put your podcast on YouTube. And there's a bunch of other, and all you have to do is you have to then submit that RSS feed to all of those different companies, and it takes some massaging of them to get them to pass it. Usually, if you get the Apple one first, the rest will follow. And then what they do is the way those apps work is they're constantly looking at that RSS feed, every once a minute or something. And if they see it hasn't changed, they don't do anything. But if they see it has changed, then they actually yank out that information, stick it on that app. So when people subscribe to a podcast, they would actually see, oh, look, Joe's got a new episode, and they would listen to it. So it's a lot more than that, but I think in about, how long did that take me? About 90 seconds? So. That's basically kind of mechanically how podcasts work.
Yeah, that's great. Where is there a place to go online through your website or through other websites first that you could give somebody as a resource, and we can put it in the show notes?
Yeah.
But is there any? Can you make a recommendation for somebody if they want to go get more information about this?
Well, on my website, habaneromedia.net. I've got a ton of free material on there. I have a whole class on how this all works, from a live presentation that's up there. I've got a bunch of articles kind of on the benefits of doing B2B podcasts. I've got articles on how to purchase microphones and equipment for that. I've got articles on how to do a good interview, how to do a good solo episode. There's a ton of free material on there. If you go to habaneromedia.net, and that's habanero with an H, like it looks like habanero, but it's pronounced the Spanish way because it's, habanero is a very spicy pepper because this is a hot idea. If you go on that website, there's just a ton of great blog posts on there that can help you. And there's worksheets on there too, and things like that.
Wow. So you've got the hookup on there, huh? I like it.
Yeah. I like putting material up on there. It's been fun. I use it for when I'm working with clients. Somebody will say, well, how do I do this? How do I interview somebody and make it an interesting episode? And I go, well, I just got a blog post on that.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll have to read that. I should have read that before I interviewed you so that I made sure.
Well, you're doing pretty good here. I think I feel like this is like a dialogue. I
think so. No, I think it's pretty good. Well, like I said, I think, I think podcasting is a great idea for even for small to mid-sized businesses. I don't think it really matters. And maybe you disagree. I don't think it really matters what your subject matter is. I don't think it matters what your industry is. I think like Pat said before, and like we've reiterated on this podcast several times, that we always start with this. If you know your audience, that's step one, understanding who your audience is. And then that number two, when we go to creating great content, this could be the great content that you get. This is the great content that you give to that audience. And it's something a little different. And I know that the podcasting world has become pretty saturated these days. I think with the availability of this technology and a lot of these upstart kind of a one click, like set it and forget it kind of podcasting is kind of oversaturating the market. I still think on a macro level, you might look at that and say, well, this is just crazy. I'll never make a dent. But on a micro level, like you were saying, Pat, if you get the right people listening to your podcast, you don't necessarily need a ton of them, but you get the right people in there, you present the right content. I think it can go really far. And it's also
the long tail.
Yeah.
It's right. It's what they call the long tail, right?
Right.
There's a lot of niches out there that have never been covered at all. You could own it.
Right. That's right. I don't think
you could totally own it.
Yeah.
I have clients that do podcasts on wine drinking. I got podcasts that do them on how to run an Airbnb. I got podcasts that talk about how to run residential properties.
Right.
When I first heard this, I'm like, this sounds like the most boring podcast of all time. They're not.
Right.
People are very passionate about their industries.
I can relate this back to, because we do a lot of video work in our company, and we have a client that's a golf course architect. They design golf courses.
That is interesting.
It is interesting, but I'll tell you,
I love golf.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. However, we have gone out and filmed a lot of their projects, and yeah, when you put a time lapse camera or you fly a drone over the course and they're doing so, it's very exciting. However, there's a lot that has to do with the grass that you put in certain areas in the course and how it grows. So naturally, we have been out on golf courses making videos about how to grow grass and literally showing people how grass grows. Now, that's probably the most boring cliche of all time. However, when we make the video and we show it to people who are golf course superintendents or golf course maintenance people or golf course fill in the blank architects, we have gotten thousands and thousands of views on these videos with comments and shares and things that you would not believe. And even though the guy is literally a guy on the video standing in front of it, behind him, and showing how grass is growing. But to your point, and just do the same thing with marketing, we had the right audience and we had the right content to the right audience. We created the right medium to get to them. And it's the same with podcasting. You could literally have anything on here. If you have the right people and you want to talk about how to grow grass or grass growing or whatever you want to do, you come up with the most boring topic ever. There is an audience for that. There's a need for that, right? And people will follow. I think at the end of the day, I just think it comes down to, it's kind of the world is in the competition of now of having great content. Like you can have content, but you need to make it really good. Like you need to follow the steps and for that Pat that has on his website, so that when you make your podcast, that it's well done and that you have good guests. Like we have Pat today. This is really fascinating stuff. And you have the right microphones and you have the right setups and all this kind of stuff so that you can get to having that great content. Because I've also heard some podcasts, I'm sure you have, Pat, they're not very good.
No.
And they're boring and they don't sound good and they're not organized and all this kind of thing. So I think at the end of the day, if you really go through that process, I think the technical side and some of that will be a learning curve, because it was for us. But I would highly recommend you guys reaching out to Pat or going to his website and learning all about that, because I think aside from in addition to doing your Facebook pages, your Instagram pages, Google My Business, the SEO, SEM portion of your world and your website, I think podcasts is a fabulous way to get your name out there and to really grow your brand. Would you agree?
I agree.
Fantastic.
It's all about growing your authority, your influence, building trust.
Right.
I mean, when people know that you're the real thing and that you would come through for them, they're going to be very interested in maybe hiring you for whatever your business is.
Right.
Yep.
Absolutely. So Pat, real quick, once again, will you tell everybody how they can get a hold of you and your podcast and all that kind of stuff?
It's easy to find. habaneromedia.net is the website for for B2B interview-based podcasts services. And if they'd like to learn a little about selling, they can go to salesbabble.com. Google the Sales Babble. It'll pop right up. And that podcast comes out every week. And we talk about selling and marketing, sales and marketing.
Sometimes, yeah. Well, great. Well, hey, Pat, we really appreciate you taking the time for joining us today on the Start Marketing Podcast. Again, thanks for your help and helping us get this one started. As always, I'm sure somewhere on the screen that you're looking at or on your handheld device, there's something that says subscribe. Please subscribe to our podcast. We like to put out content like this as often as we possibly can about influential subjects like this that can really help grow your business and help you achieve success in the world of digital marketing, no matter the size of your business. Check out the book, Stop Posting, Start Marketing. This was an Amazon bestseller. It can be found on Amazon and anywhere books are sold. And we would love to have you guys come back, check out our previous episodes. And until next time, like I always say, stop posting, start marketing.